Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as British Poetry. We in the last class discussed a very important poem, Ode to Autumn by John Keats, and in today's class also we are going to look at another important aspect of this poem, Ode to Autumn. I hope that you have now little bit understood the hidden intentions of John Keats, why he has, let us say, thought of writing this poem, and what are the, let us say, instincts with which John Keats has, let us say, written this poem. All of us know that he was a short-lived person. Had he, let us say, lived for the age like William Shakespeare, he would have written a lot of literature. But then in just this short span of 33 or 35 years, I do not remember exactly, he was the person who has written excellent kind of literature. Many, let us say, poems, all are, let us say, benchmarks, milestones of the romantic poetry. So, in the last class we talked about the permanence and the transience, which are one of the major aspects of this poem, Ode to Autumn. Why? Because Keats was a person who knew that he is going to die soon. Thus he was searching the meaning of life, the permanence of life, and the transience of the human soul from this world to the, let us say, the heaven or the afterlife. How this transience happens, how the soul passes from this life to the next life, all these questions were going on in the mind of John Keats when he was writing his poetry. I hope that if you also suffer from similar kind of deadly disease, where you know that your life is going to end after, let us say, a couple of months or a couple of years, your thinking of looking at this world will completely change. You will not feel, let us say, happy when other people are happy, or you will not feel sad when the other people are sad, but your let us say, perspective of looking at this world will completely change. You will be a minute observer. You will look at life with the meaningfulness. You will see that what is the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life, and all kind of philosophical questions are going to come in your mind if you, let us say, pass from the same stage through which John Keats was passing when he wrote this poem, Ode to Autumn. So, I hope that you can now, let us say, feel that kind of ecstasy of emotions which John Keats felt in that stage of life, in that last stage of life. So, without moving to let us say this, let us say, lecture, what you are going to learn from this lecture, in this 30 minutes lecture, what will be the outcome? So, in this lecture you would be able to consider John Keats as a disjoint between early and late Romanticism. Friends, what does this word disjoint means? Because this is going to be the, let us say, topic of today's discussion. Disjoint between early and late Romanticism. Can we say that the Romanticism, which was a very, let us say, short-lived movement for 30-35 years, can we say that we can divide the Romanticism into two parts, early Romanticism and late Romanticism? Early Romanticism including William Wordsworth, Coleridge and other writers, and late Romanticism including Keats, Shelley and the writers who are contemporary to these writers. Can we say this, or can we say that Keats is a disjoint between the early and late Romanticism? What will be the most appropriate, let us say, word to explain the philosophy of Keats? All these questions will be answered in detail into today's lecture. So, without wasting much time, let us move ahead towards the discussion on this, the word disjoint between early and late Romanticism. To Autumn is an ode by John Keats, composed on September 19, 1819 and published in Lamia, Isabella, The Eve of St. Agnes and other poems in 1820. Friends, when we, let us say, go to the background of this poem, we see that the poem is written in the ode form. Now, all of you know that what is, let us say, ode form. What is an ode? What is the definition of an ode? Ode is a kind of a poem which is let's say sung with a rhythm, proper rhythm, and there is let's say serious thought, a meditative thought which is visible in the ode, and Keats in the similar manner is trying to meditate on what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of transcendence, what is the meaning of separation from this life and going to the afterlife. Is there, let's say, the body and soul are same, or they are two separate entities? Keats is trying to explore all these things, and which is why he composed this poem on September, let's say 1819, and he published then 1 year after in the book Lamia Isabella, The Eve of St. Agnes, and other poems, which was one of the, let's say, most famous volumes of John Keats, considering all the major poems written by him. Although he struggled throughout 1819 to work on poetry because of personal problems, he has inspired to compose to autumn after walking along the Itchen River near Winchester 2 days before. Friends, this is something which is a real life experience of John Keats. Although you may feel that the poem is something illusionary, something emotional, something different from the present world, but this is not the case. Keats has, let's say, a real life experience. He used to consider that emotional experience which he felt while walking along the Itchen River near Winchester 2 days before, and then he tried to, let's say, compose that experience into the form of poetry. So that is something we must say, that the personal problems which Keats has faced throughout, let's say, this year 1819, this was a problematic year in his life, and he was kept on working on the poetry, sharing his experiences, his philosophical ideology, his philosophical development, and how he is moving towards the perfection in his poetry in this 1819 year. The poem is specially pertinent for two reasons. First, it marks what many scholars consider the pinnacle of Keats' poetic career, a highlight of his annus mirabilis, and it marks the end of Keats' major poetic output. Friends, when we talk about this poem, we feel that this poem, Ode to Autumn, is a benchmark, the pinnacle of his poetic career, the annus mirabilis, or the most important, let's say, aspect of his life. On the other hand, this poem also suggests the end of Keats' major poetic output. So there is nothing, let's say, so special, so productive, so beautiful, so different which Keats has created after the creation of this poem, as he could no longer afford the lifestyle necessary to devote himself to poetry. So, because we know that there were some financial crisis, some financial problems which came in the life of Keats, which is why he was not able to, let's say, devote himself to poetry. We know that there are circumstances which change the life of a human being, and same happened with John Keats. So we can understand, we can relate with the feelings, the emotions, the trauma which John Keats was facing in that year 1819, and in this way we can, let's say, relate our emotions with the emotions of the poet. Critics have often described it as a perfect poem, and it has been often reprinted throughout the years as an exemplar of both Keats' poetry and Romanticism as a whole. Friends, when we, let's say, look at this poem, and when established critics analyzed this poem, they found this poem as a perfect poem. There is no loophole in the poem from the first line to the last line. So, which is why it was reprinted throughout the year when it was published. It became so famous in Europe, and entire Europe and England, as an exemplar of both Keats' poetry and of Romanticism as a whole. We cannot, let's say, simply say that this is Keats' poetry, but this poem, Ode to Autumn, belonged to the age of Romanticism. The spirit of Romanticism, the essence of Romanticism which is, let's say, aptly visible in this poem Ode to Autumn. The structure of To Autumn is derived from the traditional sonnet, but was modified to highlight the unique thematic aspects of the titular season. Friends, when we go deeply into the rhetorical analysis of this poem, we find that Keats is, let's say, somewhere trying to write a poem which is near to the traditional sonnet style of writing. The sonnet style of poetry writing was very famous in 15th and 16th century. All of you know that Shakespeare has written 154 sonnets in his life, along with the let's say plays which he has written. So this poem was, let's say, traditionally written in a sonnet style, but it was modified to highlight the unique thematic aspects of titular season. Keats was concerned how to create a holistic picture of autumn season, and which is why he, let's say, he gave this poem a new shape, a unique thematical aspect of autumn portrait. This titular season was presented by John Keats in this poem, and he was able to achieve it by restructuring the poem into the form of an ode. In total, the poem is 33 lines divided into 3, and each stanza describes the tastes, sights and sounds of autumn with the different emphasis as the poem progresses from beginning to middle to end, that represents development of a seasonal level, and annual level, and a lifelong level. Friends, when we look at this poem, it is a short poem of 33 lines, not as long as the Rape of the Lock. We feel that these 33 lines are specifically divided by Keats into 3 stanzas. And these 3 stanzas, the first one is representing the seasonal level, the, let's say, direct description of the season. The second stanza talks about the annual level. Annual level means the relation between autumn season, winter season, spring season and other seasons of the year. And the third, let's say, level, or the third stanza in the poem describes about the lifelong level. Lifelong level means the eternalness which exists in the poem, the, let's say, the uniformity which exists in this season, and how Keats is trying to relate the development of the poem with the development of life. So we can see that each stanza describes the taste, sights and sounds of autumn. How can, let's say, we imagine that a season has a taste, sights and sounds, but this is the excellence of the writer John Keats. He has personified the autumn season, considering the autumn season as a, let's say, as a company of Keats, as a friend of Keats, with which Keats is sitting, and let's say they are discussing, they are feeling each other's emotions. The nature of Romanticism brought about 2 significant ideas to the world of English literature. Friends, when we talk about this poem Ode to Autumn as a romantic poem, we feel that there are 2 ideas which Keats had given to this world of English literature through this poem. Now, these words you may find very, let's say, pompous, but you have to understand the stature to which Keats has reached after writing and publishing this poem Ode to Autumn. And what are those 2 ideas? Let us read the first one. Natural goodness of mankind, with a strong emphasis on the beauty of the natural world. So friends, this is the first idea which Keats wished to say, that is natural goodness of mankind. Human beings are naturally good, and Keats want to emphasize on the beauty of the natural world. The more you are natural, the more beautiful your world is. The more you are artificial, the more, let's say, ugly your world is. And friends, this is aptly, let's say, applies to your and my life also. Suppose you and me are living an artificial life. We are not satisfied from our job, from our business, from our, let's say, friends, the surrounding in which we are living, but we are artificially trying to portray that we are happy in these kind of settings. Then this is not something which is going to bring goodness into our life, but ugliness. To become good for the mankind, to become good for ourselves, we need to live a natural kind of lifestyle for which we are, let's say we are emerged into this world. The second significant idea which is presented by Keats is and the ability to seek passion rather than reason and imagination rather than logic. Friends, this is something very important and shows the spirit of the Romantic age. We can see that Keats is talking about the superiority of passion. People have become so much logical, so much reasonable in the present time, and Keats is offended from these things. Keats want to say that the passion or imagination are the two human constraints which can make a person's life natural. If you are behaving in a passion manner or imaginative manner, only then you can achieve that naturalness and the satisfaction of goodness in your life, according to John Keats. The English-born poet John Keats was a clear product of the Romantic environment, who, despite leading a very uneventful life due to his inevitable death, constructed poems that served to explore the imagination. Friends, when we look at this poem, Ode to Autumn, we feel that John Keats is a product of Romantic environment. That Romantic environment is visible in his personality. We cannot deny it. John Keats was made to become a Romantic writer. Although, unfortunately, he lived an uneventful life. Not very, let's say, happening kind of life, and there was inevitable death. He cannot avoid it. But even then, he was so positive, so good, that he constructed poems that served the imagination world of human life. He gave human imagination new heights into his poem. Nobody was able to, let's say, thought in the way Keats has thought into his poems. Keats' use of strong imagery ranges among all our physical sensations, such as sight, hearing, touch and smell. Friends, when we look at the poetry of John Keats, we feel that he is talking about an age which is above the basic sensations. He is feeling something divinely, something which common people cannot feel. And Keats combines these senses into one image to produce a sensual effect and shape our interpretations of his poems. And why, let's say, friends, why Keats is writing these poems? Because the sensual effect which is creating storms into his mind, he wanted to give them a shape, an image, and he gave that image into the form of a poem. He shaped a poem, interpreted his poems, and only through that we would be able to understand what is going on into the mind of Keats. This is evident in La Dame sans Merci and Ode to Autumn. These are the two most famous poems of John Keats. Ode to Autumn could also have been written as a message from Keats to appreciate the simple things life can bring every moment, and this is communicated using seasons of summer and autumn symbolizing the different stages of life. Friends, when we look at this poem Ode to Autumn, we see that Keats want to appreciate the simple things in life. He want to enjoy every moment of happiness into a person's life. He want to communicate using seasons of summer and autumn symbolizing its different stages of life. Summer represent a different stage, autumn represent a different. And maybe in this way we can relate the entire cycle of 1 year with entire cycle of one human life. So the seasons come one after the other. In this way the stages in human life also change one after the other, and ultimately the year ends, and in the same way the human life also ends. From a personal perspective, Keats's main theme is that autumn is a season of joy and abundance. This is presented in the first stanza of the poem, where Keats uses strong and colorful imagery to celebrate the richness and beauty of the season, such as season of mist and mellow fruitfulness, with fruit the vines that round thresh eaves run. This is a quotation from the poem. Friends, when we look at this poem from a philosopher's perspective, we feel in the very first stanza of the poem, we feel that Keats is, let us say, using strong and colorful images. Why? Because he wished to celebrate the richness and beauty of the season, autumn season, and which is why he writes, let us say, this beautiful line. He says, seasons of mists and mellow fruitfulness. So, this is the season, autumn season is the season of mist, surrounded everywhere, and then there is a mellow fruitfulness, the fruitfulness of the, let us say, crops or the trees or plants, etc. And that fruitfulness is visible in the fruits, the vines that round thatch eaves run. The fruits are then, let us say, the wine is prepared through those fruits, and in this way there is a round thatch which eaves run. Eaves are the, let us say, some supernatural creatures, and they are trying to create this wine, and when we drink this wine we are going to, let us say, transform ourselves from the real world to the virtual world. Keats uses these descriptive words to appeal to the senses of the reader and create a humble, peaceful yet lively atmosphere. Friends, when we look at this poem, we see that Keats is using descriptive words, minute description of the setting. Everything is discussed with the senses. Readers can feel and create a humble, peaceful and lively atmosphere in this poem. It also creates a colorful image of the natural world, which was the significant concept of the Romantic movement. So, Keats is, let us say, friends, trying to create a naturality through this poem. Keats also explores the concept of change and correlates it with the inevitable changes life can bring. He achieves this by structuring his poem in 3 stanzas that have variable rhyming, and also by comparing the quality of these 3 distinct seasons. So, just like there are seasons in a person's life, one after the other, in the same way the 3 seasons are also one after the other in the 3 stanzas are explored by John Keats in this poem. For example, in the first stanza, Keats introduces autumn as a time of warmth and harvest, where the bees enjoy later flowers and fruits are filled with ripeness to the core. When we, friends, look at the first stanza of the poem, we feel that Keats is trying to introduce the autumn as a time of warmth and harvest. The crops are fully grown, there is a warmth in the season, they are fully ripe, the fruits are ripe, and now the farmers are there to cut those crops and to, let us say, catch those fruits. So, the bees are trying to enjoy the later flowers, the flowers which are, let us say, fully grown. Bees can get all kind of, let us say, the elements for their survival from those fruits, and the fruits are filled with ripeness to the core. In his second stanza, though Keats create a melancholy atmosphere at the approach of winter, where swaths have their twinned flowers cut down and the sky is empty as thou watchest the last oozing hours by hours. When we, let us say, proceeds further in the poem and when we go to the second stanza, we see that Keats is trying to create a melancholy atmosphere of the winter season. Melancholy, something sad for the winter season. Why? Because he is trying to portray the winter season which swaths have their twined flowers cut down, the flowers which cannot bear the coldness of the season, and the sky is empty as thou watchest the last oozing hours by hours. We can see that the sky is empty, there are no colors in the sky in the winter season, and in this way he is trying to watch the last oozing hours by hours. Maybe the weather, the nature is also drowsing like the people in the winter season, like they cannot come out, it is too cold. However, in the third stanza, Keats begins with a rhetorical question. Where are the songs of spring to directly communicate with the reader and advise, think not of them, thou hast thy music too? When Keats reaches to the third stanza in the poem, he is talking about the spring season. Spring season is the season of songs, reawakening from, let us say, sleep, and which is why Keats is asking this rhetorical question, and he is answering on his own. He is trying to communicate with the readers. There is a direct connect between Keats and the readers, and then he says in the poem, think not of them, thou hast thy music too. He says, you must not think of the, let us say, songs of spring season, but there are songs of this autumn season as well. The autumn season is as much beautiful as the spring season, and the music autumn season has, you have to feel that music. We are told to enjoy the beauty of what we have now and listen to the hedge crickets sing red beast whistles to spring will come in time. When, let us say, when we analyze this poem, we see that we have to enjoy the beauty of the present, the season in which we are living, and Keats suggests us to listen to the hedge crickets, one of the insects which has a buzzing sound, and these crickets sing red breast whistles. The whistles, the sound which is coming out from these crickets is looking like, let us say, is heard like a whistle of the spring season which will come in time. So, maybe it suggests that spring season is going to come in the coming months of the year, suggesting a hope which is there in the autumn season of the spring season. As a whole, Keats blends the living and dying and correlates joy with sorrow and song with silence to demonstrate the oxymoron of life and the reality of mixed nature of the world. Friends, there is a message which Keats wants to convey through these images. He is trying to blend the living with the death, the life with the death, and he is trying to relate the joy with the sorrow, song with the silence, and in this way he relates the life with the realities of the mixed nature of the world, suggesting life is not always the same. The circumstances change. At one moment we can be happy, at another moment we can be sad. In the same way, the life is full of, let us say, the change of seasons. La Belle Dame Sans Merci and To Autumn are two examples of Keats' work that explore the idealistic nature of Romanticism. So, in this way, friends, we can conclude that these two poems are representing the idealism of Romanticism. The ideal life which Romantics want to live, that is, let us say, presented through the philosophy of Keats, which is represented in Ode to Autumn. Through these two poems, Keats explores the transience of beauty, as in La Belle Dame Sans Merci, as well as the changing nature of the natural world, as in To Autumn. So, when we look at this poem, we see that the world is changing in the same way the nature is changing, in the same way the weather is changing. So, everything is aligned with each other. There is a system which is set in this world, and we as a human being living a life in this world are a part of that system, and thus our life is also changing, and hence creates the notion that life is inevitable and what we must accept these changes in order to move on. So, what is the conclusion which Keats want to make in this poem? Keats wish to say that life is inevitable. We cannot deny the changes in the life. So, we must accept these changes in order to move on. Maybe Keats is trying to say that poets like me are going to born, write and die after some time, but the world will move on, the poets will keep on writing, the writers will keep on producing beautiful literature, and in this way the world of literature is going to, let's say, enrich itself year after year, decades after decades, and the readers like me and you will keep reading the works of the writers of the Romantic age like John Keats and of the present age, and we will, let's say, keep feeling the satisfaction which we get from reading such kind of romantic literature. I hope you have now understood the intention with which and the motivation which Keats wished to give to the human beings who are, let's say, who are not understanding the value of life. So this poem is not only a piece of artistic work, but a complete value system which John Keats is trying to develop, how to live life, the philosophy of life he is trying to develop through this short 3-stanza poem, Ode to Autumn. I hope that you have now understood this poem, and when you will make the first reading of the poem, line by line reading, you will suddenly understand that what is the intention with which Keats has used various imageries and various, let's say, personifications and literary devices in this poem, Ode to Autumn. That is all for today's lecture. Thank you for listening.